Hi, I'm Scott. I'm a Quiet Place fan.
Hi, I'm Senthil, and I'm a Bird Box fan.
So the two of us have decided, since we disagree, we're going to start watching as many horror movies as we can and come up with a new way of rate them. Come join us.
Becky! You're clearly a special girl!
I don't want to have to hurt you.
But I do want to hurt you real bad.
Hey, Synthel, it's good to see you again. We're back for another week. And this week we have two movies that are Becky and Antebellum. And between you and me, there were parts of both of these movies that I really enjoyed.
They're very different movies and take very different approaches to the subject of horror. And yeah, definitely there are elements about both I liked. There are elements about both that I thought that didn't work really well. So I'm looking forward to discussing them with you.
Well, so why don't you start off this week? I know that I started last week. So what was your thoughts on Antebellum?
Um, Antebellum is one that maybe warrants more than one watch because when you're going through the significant first half of the movie, without giving anything away, you're not really aware of where the director is going with this. Is this a historical piece? Is this a statement on slavery? And so it wasn't until the second half of the movie that I really started to understand what the movie was about. And so the degree of horror that I felt uh, exponentially increased the further I got into the movie. And so I did go back and watch this again. There's still elements about this that I thought didn't work. It still depends on some of the characters making decisions that that don't make sense, and it's necessary for the plot to function. But the music was outstanding. It really got under your skin, and it gave you a really creepy feeling, and it gave you the intensity. And the villains are just horrific villains in every sense of the word. So for the most part, I thought the movie worked really well. It was really well done. A bit political in nature, but that's not a secret based on the subject matter.
What I would say, Cynthia, is the reason to me that it out to be a good horror film was because of the politicalness of it. Now, last week we had talked about Wrong Turn, and it didn't work out with the political. It felt like it was a push. To me, Antebellum made me question and say, is horror about zombies and vampires or whatever else? Or is it about the things that you won't even talk about with your closest friends, right? The things that we're scared to discuss because we can't believe it actually happened in real life. And to me, like you were saying, when I was watching Antebellum, you immediately, as that starts off, number one, the soundtrack is brilliant. It builds this unease at the beginning that is a slow burn, and the way that the camera moves across this, and I'll say the plantation, right? You are captured, you're caught in that moment and brought in. Like you, I felt like there were parts of this movie, and I don't want to call it pieced together because I don't think that's fair to the directors, but it didn't seem to fit. The splice didn't seem to work, right? I've watched it twice myself and looking to see if the first time if I just missed it, but I just don't think it was there. um and I kept watching it and thinking to myself, this truly is horror. And I think it would even be more horrifying if you were the descendant of somebody who had gone through this, right? It kind of like watching Schindler's List. For somebody whose family had lived that, it was way, way more horrifying than to the average Joe watcher like I am watching it. But I couldn't help but be drawn in to Antebellum. I couldn't be helped but drawn into the fact that I know a lot of people argue this wasn't horror. This to me was a great example of horror at a different, like you and I have been talking about what makes horror. This was horror at in a different trope of horror.
Yeah, I entirely agree. As I watched the movie and started to put the pieces together, it definitely Schindler's List is a good example because there are points near the end of the movie that that it hits you very, very hard. And the full weight of what happened, you know, you start to experience that, and it's difficult to process, even for those of us who didn't have descendants, who aren't descendants of those that experienced that directly. But it's a great question. You know, what is horror? And it's an answer I think we'll come to as we go through more of these movies. But it's evolved over time. The traditional horror sense of what horror is, you know, you start with, you know, when we were younger, it was Stephen King. It was the Nightmare on Elm Streets,
Yes,
traditional classic horror, Cujo, The Shining. This is nothing like that, but it evoked very strong feelings in me of dread and despair and fear. And in those ways, it's a very well done horror movie, and it absolutely fits into the horror category for me.
I agree. As a matter of fact, when I was scoring this is the first movie I've removed with our scoring, that I have reviewed with our scoring, that I gave a 4 for plot. I thought it was really good, high on plot. I thought the characters were well done. The villains are nightmarish, just because it's too damn real, Senthil. I mean, that's one of the things we talk about, are the villains too damn real. And to me, this was just really damn real. I didn't have a ton of fear factor, but I had a lot of unease, I think is the best way to say it. I wouldn't say there was a lot of blood and guts, but the pacing was incredible. Like I said earlier, the soundtrack was just, to me, was one of those ones that just built tension throughout the entire movie. And I would say that Antebellum was very much a quiet place for me, and not so much Bird Box.
You know, as far as fear factor in Blood and Guts, there's no overt blood and guts, but the implied violence,
Very
um,
true.
very difficult to watch.
Yeah.
The fear factor, I think the way you put it, the tension, the dread, um, are perhaps not traditional fear in the sense that I was afraid and looking over my shoulder, but I really I was there with those characters, and I was afraid for them, and what the dread that they experienced was
Yes.
very clear. You could feel that, and you could see that. And the pacing is an interesting question, because the pacing is not consistent throughout the movie, and some of it's jarring. However, when you watch the entire movie, then you understand better.
Yes.
It's a difficult puzzle piece to put together and make flow well. So yeah, the sound was fantastic. It's so well done. I could see myself listening to it again. Of course, there's no comedy, not in any good way. I would rank it very high for watchability. I don't know that this is something that I could watch. I don't know if I would have watched it more than twice if I was reviewing it, because it's a very intense movie.
Now, you know, Schindler's List, Simple. I've only watched once. I went to
Yeah.
the theater and saw it, and I was bawling by the end. I can't. I have never been able to watch Schindler's List a second time. I can't do it.
Yeah, I've never have either. There's a scene in Schindler's List that really sticks with me, where at the end, he falls to his knees,
Yes.
and he's completely falling apart at what he couldn't do and who he couldn't save. And I'll never forget that scene, and I can't watch it again. And this is very much like that. It is absolutely political in nature, but it's a very necessary film, and the emotions that it invokes are real, and should be portrayed. So yeah, but I don't think I could. This is not a, let's go watch Nightmare on Elm Street Part 3 again
Right.
kind of a scenario. It's a very well done movie, but it's not something that I'd want to watch, because ironically it's so well done. I don't want to watch it again.
Yeah. No, I'm with you. And the other thing for everybody watching is it has a lot of twists and turns you got to be watching. It does not go the way you think it's going to go, and the ending to me was just a complete shock.
It definitely was very out of left field. I guess that's kind of a spoiler in the sense that audience knows there is some unexpected twists and turns throughout the movie. All the characters were really outstanding. They did a great job. The villains, it's tough being that good at being a villain. I kind of had the perspective in the past that affects your career, choices.
Yeah.
You're so good at being a villain, you make a typecast. That's how good they were. I think they
Yeah.
did a great job.
I loved it. So let's move to something that most people would definitely agree with you and I that is horror, from the stance of, and we're going to move into Becky, which I know seems weird going from Antebellum to Becky. Uh, but Becky 2020, and I will say Becky is one of those movies that sits right in the middle for me. It's not a Quiet Place, it's not a Bird Box, totally watchable. I did enjoy it, but it was completely out there. I mean, Cynthia, when you go to cut off your eyeball with a pair of kid scissors, we are we're in the hills have eyes territory here. What was your thoughts?
Yeah, there's without a doubt some of the most over the top violence that you're going to see ever. It's not Eli Roth level of violence, but it
No.
probably isn't too far off of that. Uh, and I don't know how much of that violence was just for shock factor versus contributing to the plot in any way. I don't, and some of it's intended to be comedic, and you do. There are rare occurrences in horror movies where you see terrible violence and you laugh. There are lots of moments like that in this movie.
I am going to say there were actually a lot of moments that I think you weren't supposed to laugh, but I was laughing because it opened itself up too much for
Do you really think it was unintentional comedy, or did the writer really know how the audience reaction is going to be for those kind of scenes? So the
I don't
motorboating scene.
know. I mean, so how old was the female character in this movie? What was she supposed to be, like 12 or 13? I
Yeah,
can't.
definitely. Very
So I
young.
mean, there's this whole scene with a ruler that you're not going to help but get away from, the whole, take the whole 12 inches. And then there's this whole scene that all I can ever think of was motorboating, which was completely wrong. But again, I don't know, Senthil, did they do those going, yeah, people are going to totally see that and think it's hilarious, or was it unintentional?
No, I really believe it's intentional, because this is one of those rare movies in horror where the main character is underage, but the movie's not for underage.
Yes, yes.
I don't think the star of the movie um, would have been allowed to watch the movie that she starred in. So I do think it's intentional adult humor throughout. But there's some really great moments. There's some really great lines. But overall, the term I would use for this is contrived.
Yes,
Uh,
yes.
and because of that, it was more of a Quiet Place than Bird Box for me, because I think the tension and many of the plot elements were contrived for the purposes of moving the plot rather than being a natural part of the story.
I would totally agree with that, especially
Wait, did you just admit that Quiet Place is
no, no, no.
a
What I was
terrible
admitting
movie?
to you is that I agree with certain points that you're making, and that it falls more towards a Bird Box than a Quiet Place. Uh, but and for a big reason for me is that I thought the characters in Bird Box were freaking horrible. Other than Sandra Bullock, who I know you're in love with. If it had Nicole
Who
Kidman
isn't?
in it, Senthil, I might have been a Bird Box fan if Nicole Kidman was the main person. But here's the thing: I couldn't have given a damn about any of the characters in Bird Box. I didn't care. And in this movie, in Becky, I they never built this up. And the other thing that frustrated me about Becky, and I think you and I have talked about this in other when we've had conversations off video, is I have to know why you're going to turn to be this way, right? And there was too many things at the beginning of this movie that made me say, no, Becky was actually a pretty nice child until this thing happened. And then this one thing happens and she becomes a complete sociopath, right? I have a hard time with that. You got people going out that have, that see some horrible things in their lives and turn out all right. This one event turns this girl to doing things that I can't even imagine an adult doing. I mean, even if you were in the situation she was in, you wouldn't do them. So you become a total sociopath over this event. That was the thing that turned me off.
I would agree. That's part of when we go through the categories, the plot contrived for me. A lot of the elements of the plot didn't really work. and didn't make any sense and didn't flow into the story. The characters, there was no character that I really cared about.
Yeah.
And no character that I understood, and no motivation that I could come up with why the characters behaved they were. Outside of that, the entire character set were all psychotics, and maybe that's just, as we shouldn't think any more than that. Villains, maybe they're all villains. I don't know if there is a protagonist in this movie other than the one that gets revenge. There's no fear-inducing moments, a lot of cringe-inducing moments in the type of blood and guts and horror, traditional horror that we saw. The eyeball scene, for example, I had a hard time watching that. That was just so realistic looking, and Kevin James Mall Cop, pulls off just a incredibly difficult scene and makes it convincing. Pacing, I thought it was a little bit slow in places, so it didn't really work for me. Sound was pretty good. I'll give a thumbs up for sound. It was convincing. Comedy, unintentional, but I have to believe that the writer intended for there to be adult humor. It's like when you watch The Simpsons and you notice that there's some scenes that only adults will understand.
Yeah.
South Park, same thing. So there's no sex to speak of in it. Watchability, I would tell my friends, I'd say go watch it once.
Oh yeah,
absolutely. It's fun. In a very traditional horror way. It's lots of fun. It's unusual protagonist and villain. And so it was interesting to watch for me. So because I found it entertaining, that's why I said it was closer to Bird Box. I didn't scream at the TV as hard as I do when I watch Quiet Place.
Well, right, Synthel, I want to thank you again for spending time with me. And then for those of you watching, don't forget you can also go and check out. We have very quick reviews. We don't try to give away a lot of the movie in our reviews on our blog. We just give you a very quick overview and then our scores. You can catch that at www.offlon.org. And we will talk to you next week.
Looking forward to it. Talk to you next time.